Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you so much to David and to P.A.R.K for inviting me, and thank you so much as well to Cambridge for inviting me, and thank you everybody for being up early on a Saturday morning and being here and being ready to go. I hope you are ready to go. Right, so what we're going to look at today is teaching humans. Okay, and so what I'd just quickly like you to do, if you wouldn't mind, is in the chat, could you just tell me who you teach? Could you just write children, teens, or adults, or maybe it's some kind of combination of those? So who do you teach? Let me just have a quick scroll down. Teens, adults, right, okay. Lots of teens and adults, some children, all right. Okay, that looks brilliant. Okay, so my next question is, I can see loads of you teach teens, a lot teach adults, quite a lot teach children. And how many of you teach humans? Yeah, oh, that's really good news. I see somebody says, I think so. Okay, right. If anybody here doesn't, I haven't seen a no yet. Oh, somebody says no. Yeah, if not, just you're in the wrong presentation. Okay, so you better move off somewhere else, because what we're going to look at today is teaching humans. Humans, we love them, don't we? But let's just have a look at, as teachers, you know, we often have to make lesson plans, and sometimes maybe you're up late the night before and you make what seems like the perfect lesson plan, and you think this is going to blow their socks off, and you think, you know, they're really going to learn from this, and then it doesn't work. Okay, you recognize that situation? I'm sure we've all been there. And so there are loads of reasons why a perfect lesson plan might not work. But very often there's technology, I admit, but the main reason that things don't always work is because of one little thing, and that is students. Okay, so the plan is perfect, but possibly the students don't react in the way that we think they're going to. And why is that? It's because they're humans. That's the joy, and that's the challenge, that we are teaching humans. So what we're going to do today is look at how some of the challenges that we have teaching humans, and they can be humans of any age, really. Especially, I would say, with teens, but also with adults. Adults are perhaps able to control some of their human elements a little bit more, and children in a different way. So we're going to look at those, and some techniques that that I find work when I'm teaching groups of humans. All right. Oh, sorry, not yet. Okay, so what I want to do is ask you, I'm going to show you some things that teachers often say. And I want you to think about whether you have ever said those things, or if you've heard other people say them. Okay? And I believe we're on a slightly different platform to one I normally use. but I believe you can you put your hand up or something like that? I think there's a hand putting up thing. If you can do that, please do. All right. So the first one, have you ever said or heard anybody else say, they all groaned when I asked them to write? Okay. Right. Okay, so I can see some hands going up here. Okay. And I can't actually see how many are, but never mind. All right. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I've heard a lot and I've said a lot. You know, it's just, you think you've got this really good writing activity, but oh, right, you know, it's basically too much effort. It's are people being lazy or not? It's just the effort to write. It's okay just maybe to write a tweet or something like that, or to write a quick message on your phone, but to actually sit down and take a pen and write an essay or something, oh no. Okay, how about this one? I see Lucy says, one of my kids always bangs his head on the desk whenever I ask them to do that. Not too hard, I hope. All right, have you ever said this? Half of them hadn't done their homework. Ooh, can I make the slides bigger? I don't know if I can. Are the slides small for everybody? Okay, it's okay. All right, okay. Right, perhaps a person who's bigger, maybe you can enlarge them on your screen. Okay, so yeah, half of them hadn't done their homework. I'm sure you've heard this one before, possibly more than half. Sometimes I think it's, yes, Zora. Sometimes I think that it's a teacher's job to give homework and it's a student's job not to do it, I think. So I think that very often students have good intentions. They intend to do their homework, but they kind of get distracted by other things and it doesn't ever quite happen. But I think the intention is there. Okay, what about this one? Okay, I don't know if your students are allowed to have phones in the class. There are reasons for and reasons against. So I don't know whether you say or you hear this. Somebody was texting throughout the lesson. Okay, and sometimes Reka says, and on the desk sometimes. And yeah, the really good point, Jakub, is about if they're online, even more so, often you don't even know what they're doing. And you never know, they might be doing something that's completely related to the lesson, but they might not be. And good point, Dana, we don't actually know what they're doing if they're online. Okay, right. Okay, so what I now want you to think about is, what about you? Yes, you. Okay, so are these human foibles that we're talking about, do they only apply to your students, or do they also apply to you? Okay, so let's think. What about you? Do you ever say any of these things? Just think about this. Do you ever think, oh, I can't be bothered to do something you know you've got to do and you just can't be bothered to do it? Yeah, I know. You do, don't you? Of course you do. What about this? Do you ever say this? Maybe you've had to do some reports or something like that, and Andrea says we're perfect as we're teachers. Yeah, and you don't get those in on time. You really intend to, but it just doesn't happen. And do you ever kind of procrastinate rather, and you just think there's so many other really important and interesting things to do, like checking Facebook, playing, I don't know, do people still play Candy Crush? I'm not sure, but or even tidy the sock drawer, or all those things that suddenly feel really desperate to do. So I'm sure the answer is yes to all of those. And this one, I think, is a little bit of a sad one. But a lot of people say that they don't read as many books as they used to. I don't know if that one's true for you or not. Yeah, just looking at there. Okay. Yeah, it's easy to read blog posts, to read little articles and things like that. But yeah, maybe this has changed actually during lockdown. Perhaps you do read more. But perhaps before lockdown, I really had this feeling that I wasn't reading big books so much anymore. So let's have a look at some of these reasons. These are all reasons that people don't get things done. Okay. And we could talk about laziness. I think there is. I think in some ways humans are lazy. But on the other hand, they can be full of enthusiasm. I think laziness is actually a very complex concept. It's not really that you're lazy or you're not. You're usually only lazy about things that you don't really want to do. I can remember sitting in a restaurant in Norwich, and there's a big sort of square outside, and it says everywhere no skating, no skateboarding. So of course it's full of skateboarders. And so I was watching, this restaurant overlooks it, and I was watching these kids, and one in particular, he was there for an hour and a half practicing the same move. And I was thinking, why can't I get my students to do that, to practice something for an hour and a half, to really want that perfection? But it's got to be something that they really, really want to do and that they've chosen to do. Okay, another thing, and yes, Rue, sorry to remind you of sitting in restaurants. It was a while ago. Procrastination. Okay, so always putting things off. I think I saw in the chat somebody said there's no such thing as procrastination, just priorities. But sometimes it's getting the right priorities, isn't it? I've done a fair bit of materials writing in my career, and I don't know if there are any other writers here, but if so, you know all about procrastination. The house is never so tidy as when there's a deadline coming up. And it's one of the reasons, one of many reasons I went into teaching, is because you've always got deadlines and it just makes you get on with it because you don't have any choice. Okay, and what else have we got? Distraction, just so many distractions nowadays. And because most of us have got our students online, those distractions have really come into their lives even more. So we have to cope with that as well. There's also this need for instant gratification. So often, I think this is part of this thing of not always wanting to read long books. Just tell me quickly what's this about? So there's lots of that as well. Okay, so what I want to do is have a little look at why, as humans, we all, I would say almost all of us, should I say suffer from these human elements. Let's have a look. Okay, and you said that most of you said you taught humans, and I wonder if anybody teaches elephants. Well, what we're going to look at is how maybe we're all teaching elephants. This is a great analogy that I read from a writer called John Haidt. I'll give you the reference in a minute. And John Haidt says that the brain really has two parts. Okay, we're not talking about left and right here. It's a different thing. But it's like there are two parts to the mind. And there's the elephant and there's the rider. And the elephant is the unthinking, automatic, gut feeling part of your mind. It's your visceral reactions, your emotions, your intuitions, all things like that. Okay, it's, if any of you have read Daniel Kahneman's book, and I'll give you the reference to that in a minute, it's what he calls System 1. Okay, it's those things that you just do, what you really want to do, what you feel like doing. And then there's the rider. And the rider is the conscious, rational thought. And the rider is the one who thinks carefully about what needs doing and acts as a guide. And if you think about the rider sitting high up on the elephant, the rider can see the future. The rider can talk to other riders and ask about what's ahead. The rider might be able to read a map. Okay, and so the rider needs to try to guide the elephant. So when the rider and the elephant want the same thing, fabulous. Okay, because the rider can help the elephant to get what she wants. But if the elephant wants one thing and the rider wants another, so for example, the elephant just thinks, I want bananas, okay, give me bananas. Then the rider has a real job on their hands, trying to get the elephant to go where he wants the elephant to go. Okay. And Lenka says, why does the driver of the elephant think she needs to control the elephant? Well, if we're really talking about elephants here, because sometimes the elephant has to go somewhere. But you're right, we wouldn't really want that in the wild. Okay, so if there's the conflict, then it's usually the elephant who's going to win. And I'm sure, oh, sorry, these are the references that I was going to show you. Yeah, so John Haidt is The Happiness Hypothesis. I always think the book is better than the title. Julie Dirksen is where I first read about John Haidt, and is another book that I love, Designed for How People Learn. And the Daniel Kahneman Thinking Fast and Slow, which I think David kindly put in the chat as well. Okay, all favourite books of mine. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with this experiment, which was done in the 1970s, where they, an experiment done with 4-year-old children. And they took them into a room and they gave them one marshmallow. It's a type of sweet. Gave them one marshmallow and said to them, I'm going off to get another marshmallow for you so you can have 2. But if you've eaten, when I come back, if you've eaten the one marshmallow, then you don't get the other one. So these poor kids, they were stuck there in the room with the marshmallow, which they mustn't eat. Well, they could eat, but if they didn't eat it, then they would get 2. Okay, and they did this experiment and looked at how many of the children ate the marshmallow, and it was what mechanisms they used and all sorts of that, all about their strategies. But what was really, really, really interesting was 15 years later, they got those now grown up, much more grown up children back, and looked at their lives, and they found the ones who could wait, the ones who had strategies for delaying their gratification, they had got into higher ranking universities. It's quite scary, isn't it? But being able to delay gratification really seemed to make a big difference to their lives. And it means that they had more control, that they were more like riders than elephants, perhaps. Okay. So, yeah, so what can we do here? What we really want is to get the elephant to do what we want, okay? Just like we want to get our students to do what we want, okay? Because what we want them to do is learn. That's why we're there. So maybe we should just give the elephant the bananas and give them the rewards and get them to do what we want them to do. But actually, there are numerous experiments that show that rewards don't really lead to learning. They might lead to people doing things, okay, but they don't really lead to deep and lasting learning. And in fact, they can even stand in the way of cognitive processing and creativity. So probably not the best way to go. All right, so what we do need to do is to try to reach a compromise between what the elephant likes and what the rider knows is good for the elephant. Okay, so here we can see that the elephant is having a great time. Looks to me like she's having a really good laugh. She's enjoying the water, but the elephant, the rider also knows that the elephant needs to keep cool, keep clean. I don't know if elephants need to keep clean, but maybe. What really, as David mentioned, the first time I met him, I was doing a talk about spelling. And so I was really happy to see that this elephant is actually practicing his spelling. Look at that beautiful S. Okay, so practicing handwriting and spelling. So this is exactly what we want. The elephant's having a great time and is also learning. So elephant happy, rider happy. Okay, and so if we can do things that are fun, that are enjoyable and engaging, then that's perfect. Unfortunately, I don't have time to look at many activities today. We're mainly going to look at some techniques. But I'm sure during the day you'll be picking up lots of other things. So let's go back to bananas. So the bananas are like the distractions, the marshmallows, I saw somebody else say. And so I think we have to be honest, we can't eliminate them. I know some people said in the chat, oh, I don't allow phones in my class. And, you know, yeah, that's one thing we can do. We can say that they can't use phones. And I think there are good reasons for that, both ways. But perhaps what we can do is make those distractions fade a bit and bring other things to the foreground. Okay. I think it's probably, otherwise I think it's a battle we can't win. So we can try to do this. So just get those from the forefront of their minds. I mean, I would certainly insist that students turn notifications off because that's what really gets them. So we may not be competing in terms of deliciousness. They're not bananas, and students know that they shouldn't be eating the bananas or fooling around with Instagram in class or anything like that. And they may not even intend to, but it's just like it calls to them. It's, I don't know about you, but if I have chocolate in the house, it calls to me. It's just from deep inside a cupboard where I hide it. It's saying, eat me, eat me. And so we need something that calls louder. So we need to keep our students really involved all the time. So some things that I do, if I'm in a face-to-face class, remember that, I use mini whiteboards a lot. So I don't know if you use them or not, but these are just little whiteboards that students have. This little whiteboard, if you can either buy them very cheaply or you can laminate a piece of paper, and it's not quite as good, but nearly as good, and a marker pen. And if you ask them questions, and then you can get them all to write their answers of things that have fairly short answers. And so it just keeps everybody doing something. Everybody's got to have a role. And for example, if you are asking yes or no questions, you can just get them to write yes or no on either side of the board, and then they just hold it up, they twist it the way they want to do it. And online, I mean, if you're using Zoom, of course, you know, you've got all of these lots of different ways that students can interact with you. Obviously, there's the chat, which is quite challenging when you've got however many, what have we got, however many hundred people we've got in here, 250 people in here is quite challenging, but with a class can be really good. Polling, if you put up a poll, and it's just something for students to do, and it makes it much more two-way as well. Using breakout rooms, obviously. I know in some schools, teachers are not allowed to use breakout rooms, which I think is dreadful, because they really bring alive online classes and give students time to talk to each other and things like that. And even just the reactions, you know, just giving them something to do. Okay. And of course, the sharing screen as well, because you can get them to do things, perhaps in groups, and they make a screen and then they share it. So lots of things we can do there to keep them. Okay. I'm just having a quick look at the chat. Yes, Andre says breakout rooms are difficult on Google Meet. Yes, you have to keep setting up separate ones, I think, don't you? Okay. All right. And okay, and somebody's saying, David's saying, in some schools, none of the teachers or students turn on their cameras. I mean, I do think, I'm often asked about this, about getting students to turn their cameras on. And as teachers, I think we always want them to have their cameras on. But I think it might be another battle that we can't always win. I tend to think that maybe it's not such a bad thing if they have their cameras off. Okay, you don't know what they're doing, but if you're giving them other things to do all the time, I think there are so many complex reasons why students might not have their cameras on. And some of them are quite serious ones, that their background may not be as good, especially if they're teenagers. Their background may not be as cool as they think their friends' backgrounds are, or they might, you know, they might have people walking around. There are all sorts of reasons, and body image and all of those things. So I think if we can get used to students at least having that choice, maybe it just takes a bit of stress off us as well. Yeah, okay. some really nice hints coming up. Unfortunately, I don't have time to do all of those, so perhaps somebody will note those down. Okay, so something else is targets. I have really mixed feelings about giving people targets. Generally, I think often targets don't work, and if we think about governments, for example, governments often have targets, and then I think they spend more time trying to make us think that they've met those targets rather than actually meeting them. And so when I do targets, I like to do them like this. I like students to set their own targets. And so what I do is give them a chart like this. This was something that I originally developed for spelling. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that that there's something that we regularly give them that is marked out of 100. Okay, and so if I've got a really good student, you know, the bullseye in the middle, you know, might be 100% or 90 to 100%, say, and then the yellow one here might be 85 to 90, and this might be 80 to 85, for example. Okay, whereas if I've got a student who, you know, on a good day gets 50%, then this might be 70%, and this the yellow one, 65 to 70%. Okay, so their targets are actually customized to what would be good for them. And I found for some of my students that worked really well. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so I've got some more things here that I'd like you to say. It's actually easier if you can do it in the chat, please. Do you ever hear this? That you've sorted out this role play, and you know, you've decided who's going to play what role, and you give them the roles, and then they don't want to do it. So anybody have that? Lucy does, yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, some other people as well. Yeah, it's quite a difficult one, isn't it? Because it's actually something I really avoid doing. I used to give students particular roles, but nowadays I tend to avoid doing that, just because sometimes it's not very nice to be told you believe this. You know, if I gave you a role play to do, and I said, okay, I'm just going to take Larry, because he's the last person who wrote on here. If I say to Larry, right, Larry, you believe that teachers should only have 1 week holiday a year, and you have to argue that. And then, you know, and Larry's thinking, well, no, I don't believe that, and I don't really want to make that argument. So I think we have to be careful about that. What about this? Do you get this? Somebody who's always clowning around trying to make the others laugh, and it's a real distraction. Let's see, can you give me a yes, or maybe a no, or maybe a sometimes? Okay. There's often one clown, isn't there, in each class? Okay. And somebody's saying it was me. All right, okay. So, you know, just thinking about why they do that. Is it perhaps it's a way of being liked, or is it just them expressing their personality? And yeah, but I think very often it is about getting, you know, people laugh with you, and it gives you a good feeling. And so I think it's that. And yeah, I just saw somebody put a comment that now people clown around with the filters, you know, so they're putting on little rabbit's ears and things, and it's great fun. I've done it, but you know, I wouldn't do it in a staff meeting, for example. And I'm thinking that maybe a few of you have had this one as well. Lucy, I know that when you laugh as well, it gets even worse, doesn't it? And I'm sure you have people who won't speak in English. And there are so many reasons why they won't speak in English. I remember when I was quite a new teacher, I was getting really frustrated. You've got to speak in English, you've got to speak in English. But there are so many reasons why they don't. So let's look at some of these reasons why students might not cooperate. And often is they want respect. They want to decide their own roles that they're playing. You know, they've got their own thoughts and they want to express those. I think the wanting to be liked is huge, and that I think it's a huge driver of human personality. And but the other thing is there are delicate egos. You know, if you ask people to speak in English, they might be speaking in pairs with someone else who they feel like their English is much better, or you know, I might make mistakes and things like that. Okay, and for you as well, you know, do you ever do something you don't really want to do? I'm perhaps talking more in the days when we could actually meet, but you know, everybody else wanted to go somewhere, you didn't really, but you did it because you didn't want to be the only one. Or, you know, you just didn't cooperate really because you just didn't want to do something. Or sometimes you didn't do things because you just didn't want to make a fool of yourself. Okay. So I think, and this screen, by the way, is deliberately blank. I think that one thing that we have to always remember, and I think most experienced teachers do, is that people come to our classes not as blank pages. Okay, there's so much more, and I think if we go into class, and I'm sure you don't, but I think there's often a tendency with newer teachers is to go into class and assume that students don't know anything, that they don't, not that they don't have feelings, but those are not taken into account enough when we're planning. Okay. So what in fact I think students are like are, and in some ways the older they get, the more baggage they've got. So they bring to class all their experiences, their fears, their own priorities, their social backgrounds, all sorts of things. Oh my goodness, we're such complicated and complex creatures. Okay, and it's the joy of being human is that everyone is so different, but it also has challenges. But what do we do, and what does our education system do? It kind of dehumanizes it. You know, a lot of classrooms around the world, I know not all, but are like this, where the students sit in these exact rows and they're always facing the front, and the teacher's at the front in that powerful position, you know, giving the right answers and all of this. And I think it can be quite dehumanizing. And the last thing I want to do is to dehumanize humans. You know, you know, being human and working with humans is the joy of teaching for me. So some of the things that we can do, I think really important is to give our students choice. And so, you know, here we've got some vocabulary on ways of speaking, and really nice if we can let them make their own questions and then they ask each other, that sort of thing. Okay, it's also, you get much more interesting questions. Okay, I'm going to just flick through this. I'm sorry, no, I'm not. No, this one. When you're doing group work, for example, and that could be in breakout rooms or in class, I find it's really useful to give students responsibility. I think if they've got responsibility for something, they work much harder. They actually take that responsibility quite seriously. So if I've got groups of 4, for example, I get them each to give themselves a number 1 to 4. Okay, so each group has a 1, 2, 3, and 4. But at the time, I don't tell them what the number is for. Okay, and then I tell them. So, okay, number 1, your job is to take notes. Okay, so everybody is relying on you to take notes. Okay, and it could be, if you're working online, to make notes onto the digital whiteboard for sharing later. Okay, and then number 2, your job is to make sure everybody stays on task and to make sure and to keep to the timing. Number 3, you're going to report back. So if it's online, for example, you might use the notes that number 1 has taken and you're going to talk through them. And number 4, your job is to make sure that everybody is speaking in English and kind of equally as well. And if they're in breakout rooms, I say, I'm going to pop into the breakout rooms. You won't see me. But if I find anybody speaking in any language other than English, you're in big trouble, number 4. Okay, and they take it incredibly seriously, and I find them really controlling each other, and that's great, and they've all got that responsibility. Okay, and one last thing is I like them to take responsibility I ask them questions, and I find when at the end of lessons, and I find at the beginning they're really reticent about answering these, but then they get used to it. And these are some of the questions that I ask. What have you learned in this lesson? And you know, if you're online, you can everybody has to put something in the chat on what they've learned. What you can do, if you don't want them to copy from each other, you get everybody to write something, and then you count down, and everybody clicks on send at the same time. Okay, if not, they might just write what others have said. A question I think we don't ask enough is, how are you going to remember this? And it might not be at the end of the lesson, it might be when you've just taught them something. So how are you going to remember? And then good students come up with things like, oh, actually something similar happens in Czech, or something like that. Or, oh, I know because it's always funny because blah, blah, blah. Okay. And another really useful question to ask is, when will you be able to use this? Because it might encourage them to use the language, but also it helps them to relate this slightly abstract concept that we've taught, if it is, with their own lives. Okay. Oh, always, and I'm going to have to, I'm afraid we haven't got time to do that one. That was, one more. Again, so my slide's just gone wrong. Okay, so.
That's because you're human.
I'm terribly human, yeah. That was a really nice Cambridge slide. So I just wanted to say, again, thank you very much, everybody, for being here on a Saturday morning. I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you very much to Cambridge University Press for sponsoring me. And thank you so much to David and all the other team at P.A.R.K, because it's such a pleasure to be here.